I want to thank Ms. Arinola especially for working behind the scenes to ensure that we have a very well coordinated event today. I also want to thank Honorable Executive Secretary of the Pan-African Strategic and Policy Research Group, General is here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to moderate this event and to even convene this conversation. This is a very important conversation we're having here today. Very shortly, our speakers will be speaking to us on the 6th region in the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement for mutual benefits. I think I'm just going to briefly speak on that in terms of like building context on what the conversation here today is about. The African Continental Free Trade Area itself, we all know to be the largest free trade area in the world if we're going by the number of countries, the number of participating countries, and that the pact itself would connect nearly 1.3 billion people across 55 different countries with a gross domestic product that the World Bank has valued at about $3.4 trillion US. So that just creates a scope as to why this conversation itself is very important. But today we're not discussing the scope of the free trade area or even the agreement itself, but the idea that the 6th region, which represents Africa's diaspora, and how that 6th region may participate for mutual benefits. I'd like to welcome Advogado Eduardo.
Good morning and good afternoon.
I'm in Abuja and it's afternoon, so it's really nice to have you here. Can you hear me?
Excuse me a moment, please. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you now. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. I was just going to officially welcome you to the conversation today. Such an honor to speak with you today and to learn from you, especially. So I'm waiting to just get the conversation started. I also want to welcome Mr. Yao Afu. Is he here?
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
Mr. Yao.
Yes, I'm
nice.
here.
Welcome. I'll say Etsy saying. I hope you're doing great.
Yeah.
I'd also like to welcome Dr. Melinda Harris-Barrow. Just briefly to say. And please, can we please just housekeeping rules mute our microphones if we're not speaking? Thank you.
Hello.
Please kindly check that your microphone.
No, don't lọ rúmọ̀ dára, ó bá jẹ́ rúmọ̀ dára, tí mo sọ mí ni pé tó bá pé rúmọ̀ dára ló ń gbà bọ̀, wọ́n mọ́tò tó ń lọ kàpá bọ́lẹ̀ ní power encounter.
Please check that the microphone is muted.
Àtọ́. Sọ fún pé power encounter ló fẹ́ fẹ́. Tó bá ti wá bọ́lẹ̀ ṣó ń gbọ́ mi, torí mo wà ní meeting báyìí, kó máa bọ̀ wá straight wá.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So I was just welcoming Mr. Yao. It's very nice to have you here. And I was also welcoming Dr. Melinda Harris-Barrow. Dr. Melinda, are you here? Can you please? Is Dr. Melinda here? Okay. Let me welcome our Honorable Executive Secretary, General Ishola Williams. It's really nice to have you here, sir. Would you just say a word or two?
I am here, President Ma.
Good to have you, sir. Is Mr. Charles Katuhu here? Is he here? Is Mr. Charles here? And Professor Hoge, is he here? Just making sure that our speakers are all logged in. Professor Negash is here. Hello, Professor Negash. Really good to have you here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, I do. Thank you.
It's really nice to have you here.
Thank you.
All right. So just welcoming all our speakers there briefly, I would now hand over to Avogado Eduardo, who will briefly share with us the legal opinion on the sixth region in terms of understanding the Africa Union's Constitutive Act on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Avogado, you have the floor now.
Thank you so much, Ms. Evelyn Apelli. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. I give my greetings also to Mr. Charles Caruto and also to Professor Solomon Negashi, to General Aishola Williams, all the authorities and the representatives of authorities present here, and in the person of General Aishola Williams, I greet all the members of the board of AfCFTA and also all the ladies and gentlemen that are joining with us this morning here in Brazil, but this afternoon, maybe this evening, because we are in a global network, all working together. This is Eduardo Lourenço Viana. I'm a lawyer and a teacher. I'm an African born in Brazil. Dr. Melida Barrow always present herself this way, and I truly believe that is a very good way to present ourselves. In the last week, in the last May 25, I have the great opportunity to represent and to attend the Addis Ababa Round Table. On that occasion, on that moment, I heard a very beautiful quotation that I would like to share with you. The quotation is the following: I'm not African because I was born in Africa, but because Africa was born in me. This quotation is from His Excellency Kwame Nkrumah, the first Prime Minister and the first President of Ghana. And this quotation will follow me. This quotation will guide me within my speech this morning, within my speech this day. Well, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, the Suez 60th region in AfCFTA for mutual benefits. In order to address this subject accordingly, we members of the AfCFTA, we have been researching about the Constitutive Act of the African Union. This this document, this legal document, is very important and very well written. It was signed in Lome City, Togo, in 2000, almost 22 years ago. In that moment, the heads of state and the governors, the presidents of African countries were meeting and were together in order to publicize a very important document that contains, that brings together the dreams and aspirations of an entire continent. The focus on that moment was bringing together all the countries on that on the Africa continent. But in after the publication was realized that it was important the participation not only of the countries within the continent, but also the diaspora participation. But the fact is, the text, the original text of the Constitutive Act of the African Union did not quote word by word the expression diaspora and nor the expression countries outside of the continent. The original version did not quote this, but it is clear that the participation of citizens in diaspora and also of countries outside of the continent, it's important its participation in order to achieve all the African Union goals. And so in 2003, 3 years after the signature of the Constitutive Act, was proposed a protocol of amendment, including that it proposed the inclusion of a lot of new subparagraphs. And one of these new paragraphs is to invite and encourage the full participation of the African diaspora as an important part of our continent in the building of the African Union. Unfortunately, this protocol was not approved yet. It was not fully ratified by at least two-thirds majority of member states of African Union. So it does not has it didn't come into force yet. And addressing this matter, we members of FANASTRAG, we have worked on a legal opinion and on a draft of a regulatory protocol addressing this matter. And that is what I'm going to share with you this day. Our legal opinion is resulting about how can we make the participation of countries outside of Africa continent and the citizens living therein, how can we make this participation legally fundamented in legal terms? How can it happens in legal terms? We reached two possible solutions. The first solution we reached, the first one is the so-called hermeneutic solution or interpretative solution. The hermeneutic solution or the interpretative solution is to make an exercise of interpretation. The hermeneutic is the law branch, the legal branch, the legal field that looks for to find the best interpretation for a given text. You have a legal norm, you have a paragraph or a subparagraph, and you need to try to find out the best interpretation for that article. As I have told for you in the beginning, the Constitutive Act of African Union, in the first moment, aimed to bring together the dreams and the aspirations of an entire continent, bring together the countries of the Africa continent. It was, since the beginning, an Pan-Africanist project. And you know that the Pan-Africanist projects are projects that includes the diaspora. It does not exclude the diaspora. So if the Constitutive Act is an Pan-Africanist project since the beginning, so we can ask to the Court of Justice of the African Union, and we can ask, in the absence of the Court of Justice of the African Union, we can ask to the Assembly of African Union. Thinking about the preamble of the Constitutive Act, the Article 1, Article 2, and especially Article 3 of the Constitutive Act, reading these articles together and together with the preamble, is it possible to allow the participation of countries outside of the continent and the countries and the citizens living in therein? Is it possible to allow this participation? Of course, not we ourselves we are going to ask, but a member state will address the assembly or the court of justice of the African Union in this sense. If the answer given, the answer shared by the court or by the assembly is yes, it is possible, this document published can be used until the correct amendments are done in the Constitutive Act. And you can ask, what is the legal basis of this interpretative solution? The legal basis is the already into force Article 26 of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, because this role, this duty, this function of interpretation is already given. It is already given. Oh, hello, Professor George Gumbe. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. The Article 26 of the Constitutive Act of African Union already gives to the Court of Justice of the African Union, or in its absence, to the Assembly, this interpretative role. So the interpretations given by the assembly or by the court are already a formal, a legally fundamented, a legally based interpretation. That is not the most beautiful, that is not the best solution in a parliamentary point of view, but it's a very fast solution. What can make the process within the African Union faster and more efficient. On the other hand, if the answer is no, it is not possible to allow the participation of countries outside of the continent and the citizens living therein without amendments in the Constitutive Act. So the second solution is the well-known solution by amendments. The amendments within the Constitutive Act are addressed. The process for amendments within the Constitutive Act of the African Union is addressed by the Article 32 of the Act. And this process is that one fits better with the democratic principle. But the weaknesses of this solution is that it takes many years to be ratified, to be approved. Just a little amendment can take many years to be approved. As example, you can research about the protocol to amendment that include diaspora. We have almost 20 years of analysis of this document. We have also almost 10 years after the publication of the diaspora declaration, but the protocol amendment was not approved yet. It doesn't reshed majority, a 230% majority of ratification, so it did not came into force. Within our legal opinion, we are suggesting that we use the solution by amendments only in that situations that are very, very important, are vital to the African Union and to the Constitutive Act. Matters only regulatory, we suggest that they need to be addressed. We suggest that these matters needed to be addressed on regulatory protocols under the Constitutive Act of the African Union, under the Act. And in this sense, we will see the pace of the process of publication of norms of the African Union walking a faster pace. It is more efficient, it is more interesting. And you can ask me, question me, and what is the linkage between the participation of countries and participation of citizens that lives diaspora with the AfCFTA? There is a great connection. There is a great connection. General Williams wrote, and we reviewed the draft of one regulatory protocol that is connected with our legal opinion. Within this regulatory protocol, General Williams and all members of the Pan-Abstract Board, we have been analyzing the rights and obligations that these associated members states, these associated states outside of the African continent and the citizens living therein, the rights and obligations we will have with the African Union. Of course, we will not have the same rights and obligations of the member states, original member states within the continent. But as example, the regulatory protocol brings together the process of ratification of approbation to receive these associated countries, and also it also gives the possibility for the citizens to participate within the African Union. And what is the connection with the AfCFTA? Just think with me. Let's think together. I don't. You know that many of us here in diaspora, we are homesick. We are missing our motherland, and we are looking for ways to reconnect with our motherland. One way to reconnect with it is to use clothes, original clothes of Africa. Use also original accessories of Africa. We don't have these clothes, these outfits, these accessories here. We have only copies. So let's imagine if a factory, a company or a lot of factories, a lot of companies are producing those clothes, those outfits, and those accessories in Africa continent, these traditional Africa clothes, these traditional African outfits, and they can be selling. They can be selling to Brazil, and not only to Brazil, to all Latin America. These okay, I'm also almost finishing. I'm also almost finishing. These clothes being selling for Brazil and for Latin American will generate jobs, generate employment and income in Africa continent, and will foster the participation of the diaspora within the AfCFTA and within the African Union. But to have a competitive
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Eduardo. I'm sorry I have to cut you short. I'm sorry that I have to interject. I want to make sure that we stick to the time frame. I really like and enjoy what you're saying, and it's really interesting that you're talking about reconnection and just how important it is that the diaspora makes and creates that link to the continent with respect to the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. And that's really what Mr. Yao would be speaking to us here today about, because of course, when it comes to the AfCFTA and the International Network Diaspora Link Program, that has been his turf for some time now. So I think we should just hand over to Mr. Yao. Thank you so much, Dr. Eduardo. I'm sure there'll be questions for you. I think my advice is anyone who has questions should please leave notes in the chat box and we can easily aggregate the questions for the speakers. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Eduardo. Let us welcome Mr. Yao. Mr. Yao Afo, are you here?
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
And good afternoon again to all my colleague panelists and also speakers and the rest of the team. Thank you, Dr. Eduardo, as well for your wonderful presentation. My duty is to look at the link between the 6th region, the diaspora connection, and AfCFTA. I think one of the critical roles that so far I've identified is to redefine what the diaspora means. I have taken a stand where I think that the diaspora definition should move away from color and traces of our origin to territorial space. I want to see the diaspora mean any territory outside Africa as diaspora. Because if we don't add that to our definition, we will limit the scope of who the diaspora is to us. Any country outside Africa to me is a diaspora, irrespective of color. That is very key because you can have a Japanese having both roots and what you call him or her. If we look at that definition in that context, then AfCFTA can go far, because the African Continental Free Trade becomes more larger after the WTO agreement. And its focus is to utilize the resources that we have here and build a kind of industrialization and manufacturing links for an overall African agenda, Agenda 2063. Therefore, because the Continental Free Trade is structured, it's an agreement, it has protocols. Whatever that we have to do for the diaspora and with the diaspora should be also well structured. The tendency with us is sometimes we are always, sometimes in a rush. And being in the rush, sometimes we don't get the right structure. Sorry, we don't get the right structure. If we take our time, a question is, today, if you are identifying a diaspora office, where will you identify? If, for example, African Union want to invite or send an invitation to a diaspora office? Do we have one diaspora office connecting all the other diasporas? How are we organized? How is it organization? How are we structured as a diaspora? Where do we find who? Where do we find why? What? We need to answer these key questions. So that, for example, if we're able to solve the fundamentals, it is easier for us to have the integration process easily done. If the integration process becomes easily done, then it is easier for all of us to plug into the continental free trade. After all, the continental free trade focuses upon various thematic areas. And one of the key ones has to do with the fact that investment, competition policy, creativity, intellectual property rights. Another very key area is what we call tourism and the trade in services. And when we look at tourism, it's a whole area on its own, because tourism, according to the World Bank report, contributes almost close to about 50%, 49, 50% of GDP to most of the economies. And so if we are developing that reintegration of the diaspora into an economic framework, then there is the need for us to have a very grounded structure whereby it flows into the system easily. And one of the major structures I'm proposing is the institutional structure among the diaspora. If there is an institutional diaspora, it is very easy to partner and flow into the agreement with the continental free trade. One, sometimes we hear the diaspora say they want to have investment and they don't know where to invest in Africa. Sometimes you hear they say that, look, it seems we are not even ready for that kind of investment. But when we are our institutions really, really established, I will acknowledge the African Private Sector Summit, who are putting together what we call the Bill of Rights of Doing Business. If the Bill of Rights of Doing Business is really legislative among all the member states of AfCFTA, it doesn't matter which country you flow in as a diaspora to go and work or to go and invest. It's the same, harmonized. And therefore, you can't be treated differently from any other member states. It makes it credible. And so I think that, one, we need to look at our institutions among the diaspora. Secondly, we need to push for this Bill of Rights of Doing Business among the member states so that we wouldn't be hearing the report and news that normally we used to hear. Oh, I went to this country A and it was not good. I went to this country B, it was not good, because everybody's having a different way of doing things. But if we harmonize and have that Bill of Rights of Doing Business among the diaspora institutionally, it will really upskill things. The next other issue that I would like to look at in really linking up the diaspora to the continental free trade has to do with one which is very, very, very important. And that has to do with looking at the role of women and youth. The African Continental Free Trade is pushing for the protocol on women and youth. Africa's population, according to the World Bank, is the youth. About 50% is made up of the youth. Africa's informal trade, 70% is captured by women. And so it is a very important area to look at in connecting the diaspora to the protocol on women and youth. The youth have the options of going into agribusiness, which is going to be the most important wealth-fetching sector in the next 10 years. If you look at that, then you can also put in ICT, which is also key, which is pushing our technological-based advancement. And a lot of youth, I must praise the youth in East African region. They are really doing effectively well. So my interactions with most people in the diaspora, most fall within this commodity trade and ICT. They can connect through that. Therefore, if they have certain goal and agenda, they want to really do business through the continental free trade, you identify the country that you want to establish yourself. If this Bill of Rights that is being pushed is settled among legislative instruments among member states, you can connect to these authorities in doing business easily. So the women and youth is another link that is very important that the diaspora can connect. Last but not the least, from our side, that we really have to look at, which is also very, very key. The African Continental Free Trade has other sectors within the trading services that needs to be looked at. That is education and health. We have moved beyond globalization into a kind of pandemic, whatever, pandemics, where no country is spared. What are we waiting for? If there's going to be a deepening link between the diaspora through the African Continental Free Trade, we have to also look critically at education, liberalizing education and health. Because with education, we have to look at the African Renaissance again. We have to relook at most of our courses we are doing at the universities. Some of them are really not fetching anything in the current world we find ourselves. And therefore, it's also important to have intra-African educational programs that will maintain our history, that will push us from where we came from into where we are going, and that will accommodate current economic trade patterns. So education is key, and we can connect the diaspora to educational program, educational schooling, what have you. That is very, and as for healthcare is a broader area. It was sad that when the rest of the world were ready with vaccines, we will still have to call towards them for support. We can't continue to wait in that way. We have great Africans doing so well outside Africa in the area of health, in the area of inventions and innovations. What is their role? This is one of the links to which they can channel their participation, channel their supports, and identify what. I have a program, and I want to use the opportunity to say, where we organize annually what we call the Africa Globalized Investment Forum. We bring all investors, whether Africans or non-Africans, from wherever the world, to look at the economies of Africa and pitch and see which area you want to develop or you want to really invest. We know the investor is a consumer, so we make sure that the host country makes provision for whatever we're inviting the investor to do. And it's working, because at the end of the day, you have value for your money. So, Madam Moderator, my last comment for this session is that if we identify some of the protocols within African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and we put structure within our diaspora system or diaspora connections, we can really have the conversation very flexible and easy to go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yao. I really must thank you especially for sticking to the time. It's always interesting to find that building context around your response would take longer, but thank you so much for doing that very brilliantly. I love everything you said about building context on the scale and scope of what we refer or term to as diaspora, and even the all-important work of institutionalizing the diaspora. I think that that's very beautiful, very well said. And thank you also for spotlighting data on the role of women and children and the role of women and youth. I'm backed by beautiful percentages you have there. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Welcome back.
Okay, my connection failed me for back there. All right, I'm just going to invite the Honorable Executive Secretary. General is here. General, are you here?
I'm here.
Nice to have you here. We also
my
Dr. Harris.
Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
I
I
can
can hear you very well. I can hear you very well from Scotland, sir. Yes, yes.
I am going to speak about my experience over the past 20 years, trying to walk from the continent with the diaspora, and even spent some time for about 5 years in the United States, and also trying to work with the diaspora. I have discovered that all the people we call members of the diaspora are mostly in the countries, except for Brazil and very few countries in the Caribbean, they are all minorities. Even among those who have sizable population in all these countries, and all these countries are found in all the continents of the world. Therefore, it becomes very difficult to have an integrated sixth region. And why? It is because they belong to different political jurisdictions. And like Aful said, and maybe the Professor Gumbe later, they can only fit in into the economic and cultural framework of African continent as represented by the African Union. And I believe it's along that line that the African Union created the sixth region. But they did not understand at that time, in 2002, the difficulties and complexities of bringing people from different political jurisdiction in all the continents outside Africa. We need to have a critical look and change to a new framework within the so-called sixth region. And therefore, it is better, from what I've noticed over these past 20 years, that we look at each continent, and within this continent, depending on the number of countries with African descendant population, you now create either a sub-region or create a region of their own. And the way I've looked at it is this. You have the Caribbean. Caribbean already has a regional integrated community, or they are working towards it, just like we have in Africa with ECOWAS, SADC, and so on. Okay. Therefore, if you look at the Caribbean, we should just take Caribbean as a region of its own with CARICOM. And AU has already identified CARICOM as a partner with the diaspora, and maybe a leading one. Okay. Then you then look at United States and Canada on its own. Not because of the population of Afro-Hispanics, African-Americans, Africans who are living there, but also the economic and cultural power of United States and to a certain extent Canada. So we've got to take these two together. Then we then go on to Latin America, which also include Brazil. Okay, on its own as Latin America, including Brazil. You have Europe, which is another kingdom. It's only a small water called the channel that's separating them. The last one is Asia, and to a certain extent, the Pacific. Although there are no African descendants much in the Pacific, okay, but Australia, Papua New Guinea, and New Zealand are quite important also to Africa because of the Aborigines and the minority people that are staying there. So if you have this regional divide and they deal with Africa along that divide, it becomes very easy, not only for cultural, but also for economic synergy. That's the way I say it. The second obstacle that we can try and remove easily is that within the AU itself now, most of the countries in the AU have separated African descendants from what I call African expatriates. African expatriates are those who moved to Europe and all those places to go and study and decided to stay there. And some have been there since the 1800s. Okay, since the 1800s. But they still have that connection to Africa, a part of their descendants, apart from those who are forced to go there over 400 years ago. We've got to remove the differences between the two and just look at those who call themselves Africans and forget about the word descendants. And the word that I've used really, I call them non-resident Africans. Non-resident Africans. And what's also interesting is this, is that many of these non-resident Africans who are descendants of slavery and, you know, what sort of descendants you can talk about, some of them are now moving back to Africa. They're moving back to the motherland. So what do you call those ones? In Ghana, for example, many of them have acquired Ghanaian citizenship. In Gambia, same, and so on. Therefore, we should scrap, you know, the what I would call artificial barrier between Africans and transplants who came from the continent and those who are forced to have their descendants enslaved to go across. And if we can do that, it means that what will happen is this, is that everybody outside Africa and within Africa are Africans. The only difference is geographical. The only difference is geographical. The second thing also is this, is that makes it easy for us to say that since those Africans abroad cannot live in countries that are full political membership of African Union, they cannot become, like Advogado said, associate members, not observers, associate members with some legal rights and privileges. And that can easily be done. Many other organizations in the world have done that. And AU can easily do that. Now, like Advogado said, it's the process of getting this done that is important. Now, if you don't have this legal position in place, it then becomes very easy for them to become, or for us to build that economic and cultural framework that Aful is talking about. And what we can also do is this, is that in getting that economic integration, we don't need to talk politics. And I can give you an example. There's what we call the World Trade Centers. The World Trade Centers in many, many countries. There's one in Abuja and part of it in Lagos, for example. You can find it in Karachi. You can find it in Istanbul. The World Trade Centers for the headquarters are either Chicago or New York. Now, these World Trade Centers are supposed to be commercial hubs in which business people from that country or that region can meet together. Therefore, we can also create what we call regional community markets. So in Brazil, we can have regional community markets of Africans in Sao Paulo, in Rio de Janeiro, for example, in Brasilia, in Salvador, we can have that. We can have it in Santiago, Chile, or any other places where there are Africans, okay? That is what we need to aim at and to be able to do that. Right now, there are black chambers of commerce in the United States. Right now, there are black chambers of commerce. But in many other countries, you don't find that yet. In Brazil, for example, attempt to make under Lula, and since Lula left, the Afro-Brazilian, chambers of commerce or anything like that has weakened. And therefore needs to be strengthened, okay? So in short, we need to do three things, which are considered very key. One is to recognize anybody who calls himself an African, whether you are from enslaved descendancy or from moving to study and for economic reasons, educational reasons, you are still there. All of you are Africans. Two, identify those communities of Africans region by region and deal with them on a regional basis. Three, then create a legal framework in which they can become associate members of African Union with rights and privileges, as Avogadi said. And four, let us adapt the World Trade Center system that is working very, very well. I've seen it work from here to Pakistan and India and so on. Let us create that system. And if we can create that system, it's very easy for an AfCFTA network to become a global African intertrade network. And we don't start talking about six region or no six region. We have a global inter-African trade network. And that will build some form of confidence in having business linkages across global Africa, investment across global Africa. As far back as 2004, when AfCFTA did try to organize, an investment meeting between global Africans in Trinidad and Tobago. There were people from Colombia, from United States, from the Caribbean, and so on, with the African Business Roundtable, who spoke to each other to find out the possibility. Unfortunately, the business people did not follow on that later because there was no framework. There's no framework at all for them to follow up. Therefore, we need to create this sort of framework. And the last point I want to make is that Black Africans, you find them in the diaspora. They don't work with each other. They don't, apart from language problems. Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, French, and so on. They find it so difficult to work with each other. And everybody wants to set up his own organization, trying to do the same thing, wasting energy, dissipating effort, and not getting any results. Therefore, for the past 20 years, the diaspora is not moving. And you can still see that today. And what Pan-African is trying to do with its border members is to try to bring people together who are ready to work together using their skills, expertise, and experience, and just focus on having that integrated global African network. If it works, it is good for Africa. It is good for Africans abroad because I've been to about 61 countries in this world. The poorest people in those countries are usually people of African descent. It doesn't matter whether they are any color, but they're actually the poorest people. When you
Can you
compare
mute yourself if you're not speaking?
we got to do something about that. And the only way to do something about that is to create this global regional community market in which we can try to work with each other in each region. And when each region works, then it is better at one point or the other, everything will work together. And
sorry to interject, Honorable Executive Secretary. You just have 1 minute.
What I can do with AEA, to see what we can do along that regional line. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for breaking that down. One thing that I enjoyed while listening to you is just how you helped contextualize points following from Mr. Yao's conversation on the need to even contextualize this and institutionalize the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as it concerns the diaspora region. You talked about how we need a new framework, and that would bring us into the conversation about commerce in the region. And you also helped break down, give us an example of how we might break down the various regions linking the Caribbean and the CARICOM, the US, Canada, and so on and so forth, Latin America, Brazil. And spoke also on how we can deal along these divides. I want to ensure that our next speaker is here. Mr. Kahutu, is Mr. Kahutu here now? And I don't know what this echo. Okay, I don't think Mr. Kahutu is here. Is Professor Jorge, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so before I hand over to you, I just want to follow from what, of course, our Executive Secretary was saying just now about how we must seek communities, creating legal frameworks, creating and adapting the World Trade Center system across the AfCFTA network. And he spoke summarily on why it's important that we must work together. And one word that comes to mind when I think of that statement and even the context in which he said it is the word coopetition, which describes a situation where two or more persons that share similar views can work together for mutual benefits, even though it may seem as though they are ordinarily competitors working in the same space. So I don't think, I wouldn't say that too many people working on the same thing dissipates energy. I think that there's a way to synergize around that and coopete rather than compete. And this would lead us to the conversation with you, Professor Jorge, about cultural and creative economy for global Africa. And, we're speaking on creativity, and that's one aspect, and that's a whole industry where the ability to collaborate must come to life. So it'd be nice to hear from you and share your experiences on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. For beginning, I would like to share my PowerPoint. I think it's better for understanding, because my English, the phonetics is not very good. It's okay.
That's okay. I think you can share your screen. Can you share your screen now?
Okay. Good. Okay. I would like to speak some experience about the the cultural and creative industry in Africa. The starting point of my discussions is the observation made in the Creative Economy Report 2010 by UNESCO and the Plan of Actions on Cultural and Creative Industries in Africa by African Union, that the cultural and creative industries are a vehicle for more equitable, sustainable, and inclusive growth strategy, able to accelerate socio-economic growth, create jobs, and raise living standards. Since the early age, African reality have embarked on a restructuring of the economy through the agency of national, regional, and sub-regional bodies. The adoptions of the Lagos Plan of Actions and the Abuja Treaty establishing the African Economic Community. There, the culture can contribute to bringing together what politics has separated, as well as to the hastening and consolidations of the process of restructuring in the economic field. On the other hand, cultural actions can develop properly only on a solid material and economic basis, and it cannot be separated from the socio-economic reality which constitutes its backbone. This general approach to cultural and creative economy places emphasis on goods, service, and activities of a cultural or artistic and or heritage nature was origin likes in human creativity, whether past or present. This is an essential component for the continent of Africa, where so much of contemporary cultural life is deeply rooted in heritage, traditions, and ritual of the past. It also underscores the necessary functions of each aspect of the cultural and creative value chain that allows goods, service, and activity to reach the public and markets. Therefore, this definition is not limited to only the output of human creativity and industrial reproductions, but include other activities that contribute to the creations and distribution of cultural and creative products. In Africa, the concept used is essentially or basically cover all the files, included definitions, and add some form of expressions, collective and popular, which the importance for cultural diversity of African countries, traditional culture, indigenous knowledge, the performing arts, and their potential for promoting tourism. They also emphasize the role of creative industries and in preserving and promoting African identity and authenticity for the development of the continent. The status and the current reality. The domestic market is large. The examples abound. There are a number of obstacles that face, for example, after the alienating impact of colonial history, this major change profoundly affected cultural life in Africa. The great threats also weigh on the rich diversity of local culture, the lack of effective protection of the intellectual property rights of the local artists, the absence of educational programs rooted in African cultural values, an exodus of millions of inhabitants from rural areas to industrial urban areas. The official cultural policies are not adapted to the needs and situations. In most cases, the implementation of adopted cultural policy is hampered by complex political and economic problems. The fragility of institutions, persistent financial constraints, and the lack of specialized personnel and infrastructure cruelly limits the effectiveness of public policies. Hindered by the lack of capital and investments. Consequently, the African cultural sector, as well as its creativity, participates in the economic development of the continent or in international cultural exchange at the same level of its potentials. The majority of Africa's cultural industries are structured around project-based micro enterprises with a few larger global players. These micro firms need to operate in global markets and are in the need of financial and business support to ensure their economic and social value, while ensuring that they retain their local specificity. At the national level, the situation is not better. In the African Union, were produced numerous documents. The Pan-African Cultural Manifesto, the Conference de Place of Cultural Policies, the Dakar Action Plan, the Card for Africa's Cultural Renaissance, and the Action Plan for Cultural Industry in Africa. The African Union and designed different strategic conceptions in relation to the topic of study and for mobilizing cultural resource as a way for fighting poverty and enhancing sustainable development. The challenge in the contemporary world conform to the aspiration of the African Union Agenda 2063 for a continent with a strong cultural identity, common heritage.
Sorry to interject, Professor Huhe. Ms. Arina, can you please just mute your microphone?
It's not okay. I can existing different example for different country, and if you can for 3 minutes for finalizing. I can speak about.
I was just trying to make sure that
international cooperations, I think, is very, very important for finalizing.
Yes, I'm going to let you finish.
Yes,
I
for
just
international
want
cooperation, the exchange and contribution to the diaspora in the terms of promotions, business is very important. And some recommendations for to end, okay?
Yes,
I
one
have
second, Professor Jorge. I just want everyone who's not speaking to kindly mute their microphone so that we can hear him clearly. General, your microphone, can you kindly mute your microphone?
I can finish now.
Yes.
No, it's finished. The
Carry on.
recommendations. Okay. I have some recommendation for solutions about the cultural and creative economy in Africa for the African Union to establish the Deputy Director of Cultural Heritage and Creative Economy in Free Trade in Africa with the diaspora. Declaration of the Decade of the Creative Economy for the next year to 2032. The official declaration of May as our African History Month. Encourage all members for African Union member country to hold cultural events some years. Transform the Center for Linguistic and Historical Studies for the oral tradition to the Center for Museums and African Creative Economy in Niamey, Niger. Recognizing cultural institutions in Niamey, Bamako, and Accra for the development of our cultural and beyond the creative economy on Africa. Transform the African Academy of Language in Bamako into the Center of Historical Linguistic African Language and Orally. To transform the Center for History of Pan-Africanism in Accra as the Center for African History and Archive. Choice of two seats of culture in Africa and the diaspora each year, both working together to promote African culture. Thank you very much. I apologize for to speak.
Thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this, Professor Jorge, and of course we enjoyed. I'm sure that we enjoyed listening to you and learning from you as well. I like particularly your recommendations on how niche specific they are. Particular institutions that you're mentioning, but even more critical is establishing oral tradition in schools. And that still takes us back to what Mr. Yao Afo had said earlier about why we must focus health and education, particularly rewriting and revisiting academic curriculums to include some of these subjects that we've discussed here today. So thanks for that. I'm sure we can easily make your PowerPoint presentation available to participants after this event. So it'd be nice to have a copy of that, if we could have a copy of the PowerPoint presentation that you had. I just want to quickly check in on our next speaker. If you're here, it would be nice to Professor Negash, are you here?
Yes.
All right. I just want to build in from the conversations that we've been having on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. We have, of course, had a nice flow of conversations from the interpretation of the legal framework to speaking more on how we can broadly and even more specifically contextualize diaspora as a group, and speaking more into seeking communities, identifying diaspora communities, and aggregating those diaspora communities, up to discussing even the commercial aspect, which is the Chamber of Commerce's declaration of a creative economy, which I think can be a generally positive idea. Now, I want us to take the conversation towards the direction of technology. And this is something that you've been working on and researching for some time now. It would be nice to just hear from you how you see the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement faring in this changing climate of rapid social, political, economic development, and even innovative developments, particularly blockchain technology. For those of us on this call who may not know what blockchain technology is about, you might want to create a background on that and then share how blockchain technology or technology as a whole can serve as a catalyst for the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. So you have the floor now, 15 minutes. We're time conscious. Professor Negash.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Eppley. Thank you for your leadership and coordination here. I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm proud to be part of this panel. Very learned and people who've been working on this for a long time. So it's a pleasure to work with you. Just as a background, I was in South Africa and wanting to travel. I like to travel. I've been to 86 countries and counting. And I said, well, I'm in Southern Africa. I've been in South Africa, but not been to the neighboring countries. I want to go to Mozambique. Well, of course, I don't have to tell you this. The infrastructure, the roads are not usually good, and it was difficult, and that being a huge sum to even go for a day. Or the other option was to go to Johannesburg and make a 20-hour flight for a 3-hour drive location. So with that said, I said, what about digitally? Are we connected digitally? Again, this group is well aware any trade that is important trade, as we know, is the fundamental source for economic growth and countries' development. And any trade that happens between two African countries would have to go to a Western country, France, England, and other locations. It has to go there to come back in order to neighboring countries in Africa to communicate digitally. This may be by design. This may be part of the challenge we have in the progress of the continent, that some colonial system may have intentionally designed it, but we know that we're not able to do those connections. If we look into it, it's really not because it's difficult. It's been a solved problem in many countries over. Many countries have progressed beyond that and have been able to make payments and trade instantaneous through digital connections. So like the physical infrastructure, the digital infrastructure is important. So when we say digital infrastructure, we're talking about connectivity between the countries. Yes, we had this beautiful undersea cable that has brought faster digital connections, faster internet connections. So those need to be exploited so we can actually benefit from these areas. So if we look at some of the challenges and the activities we can do, I will start with the activities. One, for example, we have to do some research as a group. If we worked out some research that actually brings different entities together, we need to do more exploration and research. Two, we can work on policies, formulating policies so the continent as a whole can benefit from that. And three, we see the diverse cultures that we have. Those could also be integrated and used as an asset, if you will. By going to digital, by transforming to digital, we will benefit because it's faster, it's better. It also can be done in a less expensive, as far as cost and time, it would be less expensive to go that way. So these digital activities would help motivate the relationship, the economic relationship and the trade relationship. So let me touch on a little bit about blockchain. Blockchain is a new technology that has been in the forms. There's a lot of misconception, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of desire to see some actual experiences. But by and large, we know the storing of a data. We store data and we would be able to use it digitally in many governmental and private activities. What this blockchain technology bring to us is you won't be able to delete. If someone controlling the data source, the data store that we have, they could delete it, they could alter it. But this technology avoids deleting. You cannot delete it. You cannot also alter it without consensus from the participants. Imagine the 50 plus countries communicating. No one country can change the data with everybody agreeing. So these competing interests we have in when different countries come together, like the African countries coming together, these competing parties can actually communicate and interact in a trustworthy way because the platform allows us to do that. We can build trust through the platform. And instead of intermediaries trying to help us moderate the relationship, the computer system itself can bring that up. So that's one advantage you can think about when we think about the blockchain technology. It's really be able to go back, trace back to the original source. It would be able to see where it was changed, what the agreement was, how it was changed, and all those details, and gives you all the benefits of what a digital technology would have to offer at the same time. So when you consider that, I think that when you bring multi groups that have different interests as a country, each one of them have their own interest. Today, we have relationships with other countries. Each of the African relationship deal with a bilateral relationship with other countries. Because we are doing bilateral relationship individually, the countries are weaker economically speaking. Because they're weaker when they negotiate with a more powerful country, they are at a disadvantage. There is information asymmetry. So that's a challenge when a smaller economy is trying to negotiate with a larger economy. So you're always at a disadvantage. And instead of bilateral relationship, what we can do here is multilateral relationship. We can come together. What is good for Africa? What's the vision for Africa? What policies should we follow? So this opportunity that we're exploring, having an umbrella with an AU, a platform under AU that can actually bring people together, pushing the definition as earlier discussed, looking at the different cultural aspects as mentioned earlier, looking at those things and creating a policy and a structure that we can actually help AU organize and create would be a great plus for us. And I think the technology is there available. Here is one disadvantage I think we have as a continent, as different countries, African countries. That is the processes that we use. Business has its processes. The businesses run by following certain processes. Those processes that we use today are manual. Many countries have transformed into a digital form. We hear about cryptocurrency, we hear about digital currency. Countries are moving to that level when we are still dealing with manual processes. Those manual processes require transformation. They require to be digitized. We need to get our people, our countries ready for that. That requires, I think, the already mentioned cultural challenges need to be overcome. There is policies that are still designing for paper and pencil. So we need to change the digital first idea that any new policies that come have digital first principles. How does it work digitally? Not an afterthought. We don't design it for paper and pencil and as an afterthought, how do we use it in a computer? No, we need to promote digital first approaches on new policies. You know, policies take years to be implemented. So we need to start from policies, future policies coming out, being able to think digitally. So digital first principles is one of the things we should push and maybe promote that. So we would, when we get to the implementation of those policies, we have already spoken about, we've already addressed that issue. If I just digress a little bit out of technology and talk about the basic staple food that we all see, Africa seems to be the fertile land. However, we seem to be the one that seem to be going hungry by the numbers. How is that possible? We have made food staples commodity. We need to change that and make it a human right and make sure each country is not because the countries do not have fertile land. It's not because they don't produce. There are policies and strategies in place that are hindering those activities. So I think similarly in the digital form, we need to wake up individually, collectively, and as nation states come together to say, we're going to form this community of digital connection, which is already in place, especially for the 6th region, for the diaspora. They are in countries that have good access. Several African countries already have good access as well. So those are platforms, I think, available for us to be able to transform economically, to transform in trade communications, and to build the economy. I think starting out and building with this idea of having a digital infrastructure, I think is an important part. So I wanted to close by saying, it's as we think about digital, we should also think about the amount of effort that's already there. There are several entities, several organizations at the national level, at the private industry level that are working on this. So maybe one of the roles we should consider is building synergy between the different entities. I know a few that are really aggressively working in this. There was a news one time that there was a payment system that was done cross-border. There is a group that is working. How do we make all Africans actually be mobile with different countries? How do we make Africa smart with technology? There are a lot of efforts that is happening. And instead of duplicating those efforts, maybe we can make one of the issues through research and policy formulation and suggestions that we can create a platform that brings the different entities, the different interests, the different digital movement that are already happening in Africa to a synergistic gathering and being able to form an African vision for African digital transformation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. I really want to just thank all of our speakers here today. It's been so enlightening listening to you all and deliberating on the 6th region of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area for mutual benefits. The role of technology, of course, cannot be overemphasized. And I like just how you've broken down the use of blockchain technology and even how technology can catalyze the process of growth and development that we seek through these historic agreements. I think all roads still lead us to the very important and even central to this conversation is the point made by Mr. Aful, which is how important it is that we must contextualize the scale and the scope of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and all other correlated points that we're trying to stress here today. Before we go into discussing how to overcome some of the constraints and looking through this paper I have here, I just want to quickly take a question that we have. This question is directed at the Honorable Executive Secretary. General, this question is for you. And the question says, how much sovereignty are African states ready to give up in the name of the 6th region? This question is from, I think I have this question in the box from Sixtus Fadile Bello. So, General, are you there? Can you please quickly take this question before we go to? Hello, General, can you hear me? Can you please help unmute? You're muted, so, okay.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, so I said you have a question. There's a question here for
Yes,
you.
I've seen the question.
All right.
Now, this question has no case of sovereignty. It's already there in the Constitutive Act that there must be a Swiss region. Now, but when you read, like Advocado has said, that article, especially Article 3Q, it was ambiguous, completely ambiguous, because it is not state the legal status of countries where these African descendants or people who call themselves Africans belong to. And what Advocado and Panafra are trying to do is to see how we can redefine and concretize the legal status of whatever the region. The second thing is this, is that it was put there, it was approved in 2022, 2002. And in 2012, there's a Global African Conference in Pretoria. And it was very clear. It was very clear to everybody in Pretoria in 2012, both to the delegates who came from various parts of the world, where there are African descendants, and to the parliamentarians, because parliamentarians too had a Congress of African parliamentarians and descendants from all over the world, okay, that the whole situation of Swiss region was very ambiguous, and therefore needs to redefine it. But nobody has taken any step for the past 10 years. Secondly, too, that particular parliamentary Congress has never met since that time, since 2012. Okay, then the issue of looking at internally within the region itself, there's nobody that have worked within that region who can beat his chest or her chest to say, hey, I've managed to bring everybody together. It has become impossible. And I want to give you a very quick example, not to take the time. ECOSOC is a very important organ of the African Union. We had a meeting in New York with the director of CEDAW, which is responsible for ECOSOC. And in that meeting in 2004 at University of New York, City University of New York, we agreed along regional lines about representation of African descendants in the ECOSOC. And that regional line that I've defined again were used. But do you know what happened? Anytime they nominate somebody or elect somebody, there have been a lot of protests of the chairman of the AUC that this lady or this man does not represent us. And I've had occasions of meeting one or two members. There was one lady in University of North Carolina that I met. She was fed up, she resigned. So the point is this, is that you have to look at the whole situation again. If we are going to create that synergy within the Swiss region itself, even within Africa, don't we have problems within REX? We cannot rationalize even the REX within Africa itself. And anybody that I speak to, except for AFU, nobody wants to do it. Okay, it's only AFU that said, okay, let us try. So we are trying to work out how we can try about rationalizing even the REX within Africa itself. So is it a cost on people of African descent or Africans? We need to find an answer to that question. Let me stop there.
Yes. Thank you so much. I also want to thank all of our speakers here today once again. The context for today's conversation has been in line with the initiatives of the African Union since its creation in 2002 to make African descendants, non-resident Africans through forced and by voluntary migration in all the 5 continents of the world, active participants in the cultural, social, and economic development of the motherland, Africa, and to enhance their quality, pride, and contributions in their home and host states. The AU Constitutive Act has provided a weak legal and policy framework for the 6th region to include all the global African communities of non-resident Africans worldwide. The African Union has also recognized the financial contributions and remittances of investments to African businesses and developments, in addition to increasing efforts to entrench synergy for trade and business activities. This concept paper is actually available to us all in the chat box, and it is based off this paper that the conversation here today is being built. So the idea is that everyone has read this paper, but I think, Ms. Erinala, do I just read through the paper quickly, or or do we just have everyone quickly read through and then we can proceed?
There's no time. There's no time.
Yeah.
There's no time.
Okay. So, yes, we just have a few more minutes left on the clock. I think the paper is right there in the chat box. I think everyone can easily just download it. It forms the basis for the conversation that we had here today. Unfortunately, Dr. Harris Barrow was unable to join us, but we still fortunately covered conversations on commercializing and the Chamber of Commerce ideas on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. So once again, thank you so much to all of our speakers. This conversation has followed on how we can find the very best interpretation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and even countries outside of the continent, and discussing what the legal basis of that interpretation would be. We also had an opportunity to discuss solutions. And of course, that's my favorite subject, as opposed to just discussing the problems. What are some of the ways, and just as a takeaway and how we might reflect on this, is what are some of the ways that we can reconnect with Africa's diaspora, and how do we redefine what diaspora is? And when diaspora is being said as a keyword, what comes to mind? I think just creating a unifying idea around the concept of what diaspora represents would most definitely strengthen the conversation here. And then where will we go as a diaspora office? Where do we call home to the diaspora? I think that when we think in that direction on building institutions, it can really be helpful, and taking off the model of the World Trade Center, just like our Honorable Executive Secretary said, would also help us manifest for ourselves and for Africa, of course, an institution that's wholly ours and grounded in our ideals. We also need to look into the scope of the diaspora and the 6th region. It's good to have a basis to start off with. The breakdown our Executive Secretary gave on matching the Caribbean and the CARICOM, the US, Canada, Latin America, Brazil factions. You have Europe merging with the UK. I think within that, thinking from that perspective, of course, it's not cast in stone. Suggestions are welcome as to how we can more broadly categorize these groups. And then if we have these regions and divides, and we can then learn how to deal with Africa along those divides, And this still brings us back to the whole idea. And I think that's one thing that's central to the entire conversation today is context, how to build context around these relationships, and also how to program these contexts. I think our Honorable Secretary gave the best summary of this when he said we have to redefine and computize the legal status of the sixth region on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreements. This has been a very exciting conversation for me. I want to quickly wrap up and hand over now back to Ms. Arilona. Are you there? Ms. Arilona, are you there? Can you please close out for us, I guess?
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you for the contributions. Warm and wonderful thank you to our moderator and all the speakers. Apologies on behalf of those that couldn't join us today. Some of them had a bit of issue which came up unexpectedly. And we look forward to many more such in the nearest future. Wishing everybody a wonderful day today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. General, do you have any final comments? I guess he's off the call now.
So you can just close.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a great pleasure moderating this event today. I hope that we can continue to have these conversations and more especially take action on the recommendations that were put forward here today. I like the niche specific conversation about highlighting institutions that we are aware of and making sure that those institutions are established in their sense as institutions that hold our oral tradition, whether it's in schools, whether it's within our personal communities or within our professional networks. So that's the urge today, is that we should go out, now that we're informed, be inspired to take action on these recommendations, and in the hope that the sixth region can get a sense of its own identity and also a sense on how to create benefits that are mutually binding. So thanks everyone for today. This recording will be made available, and a link will be shared to all participants, just in case you'd like to make reference to this in the future. Thanks everyone once again, and goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye. Greetings from Brazil.
Thank you.
Thank you.